The auctioneer's voice cut through the dust like a whip crack. $10. Do I hear $10 for the woman? Nobody moved. The crowd in Caldwell, Kansas stood 3 rows deep around the wooden platform outside the Silver Spur Saloon. Cattlemen, drifters, storekeepers, men with cracked hands and harder hearts. They'd all come for the spectacle. Not one of them had come to bid. She stood on that platform alone, wrists loose at her sides, chin raised. Her dress was travel-worn, a faded blue that might have been pretty once. Her dark hair had come half undone from its pins. She wasn't crying. That was the thing people would talk about later, that she never once cried. Her name was Clara Voss. 26 years old. She had come west from Cincinnati on a mail-order bride arrangement, paid for in advance by a cattle baron named Hector Boone, who decided, after one look at her getting off the stage, that she wasn't what he'd ordered. Too sharp in the eyes, he told the sheriff. Looks like trouble. So here she was. Returned. Unwanted. Being sold on an open platform like livestock to recover the shipping costs. The auctioneer wiped sweat from his neck. $5 then. Any man with $5 and a need for a decent wife. Laughter from the back. She didn't flinch. Then a shadow separated from the alley beside the saloon. A big man. Wide shoulders wrapped in a wolfskin coat despite the July heat. A jaw like a quarry stone. He moved through the crowd, and the crowd moved for him the way water moves for a boulder, not out of respect, but out of instinct. He stopped at the base of the platform, reached into his coat, and dropped a single coin on the auctioneer's table. $10. Gold. Sold, said the auctioneer, and he looked almost relieved. The big man glanced up at Clara. She stared down at him. Nobody in the crowd said a word. His name was Elias Cord. He lived alone in the mountains north of town. He hadn't spoken to another soul in 11 months. Nobody knew what he wanted with a woman, and nobody was brave enough to ask. What happened over the next 3 days would change Caldwell forever. And when it was done, half the town would call her a hero. The other half would call her something much darker. Elias Cord had not been back to Caldwell in almost a year, and the town had not missed him. That was a mutual arrangement they'd kept without ever speaking it aloud. He rode a gray Appaloosa that stood 17 hands tall and had a scar across its left flank from an old encounter with a mountain lion. The horse was mean-tempered and nobody else could ride it. Elias found that convenient. He didn't like people touching things that belonged to him, and he didn't own much worth protecting, just a horse, a Winchester repeater, a trapper's pack, and a stone cabin 2,000 feet above the valley floor where the wind came in December like a punishment from God. He'd come down to Caldwell for salt, flour, and rifle cartridges. He'd heard the noise from the auction before he saw it, and he'd walked toward it the same way he walked toward most sounds in the wild, carefully, without announcing himself, watching first. He'd seen the platform. He'd seen the woman. He'd stood in the alley for 3 full minutes before he moved. Later, people would ask him why he did it. He never gave them a satisfying answer. The truth was he didn't fully understand it himself. He told the sheriff it was a business arrangement. He told the preacher it was a Christian act. What he didn't tell anyone was that he'd recognized something in the way she stood up there, that absolute stillness that comes not from peace but from a person who has made their mind up about something. A person who has already decided they will not break. He knew that stillness. He'd worn it himself. He lifted her small leather traveling bag from the platform steps himself, and carried it to where his horse was tied. She followed without a word. The crowd watched them go. Nobody interfered. In Caldwell, a transaction was a transaction, and Elias Cord had a reputation that discouraged commentary. They rode double out of town, her sitting behind him rigid as a fence post, her hands barely resting on his sides for balance. He didn't speak. She didn't speak. The trail climbed north through scrub cedar and limestone outcroppings, and the heat of the valley floor fell away slowly as they gained elevation. An hour out of town, she broke the silence. I won't be your wife, she said. Didn't buy you to be my wife. Then what did you buy me to be? He thought about it. The horse picked its way around the loose stone. Safe, he finally said. She sat with that for a moment. From what? I don't know yet, he said. But something's wrong in that town. Has been for a month. I can feel it the same way I feel a storm before the clouds show. She said nothing to that. But she didn't argue either. And she stopped holding herself so rigid. The cabin appeared as the sun touched the western ridgeline, a low stone structure tucked against the granite face, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. There was a covered porch, a woodpile stacked 8 feet high, and a small window facing south that caught the last of the light. Inside, it was spare but clean. A single bunk, a table with 2 chairs, an iron stove, shelves of dried goods and trap tools. No decoration except for one thing, a woman's photograph, faded, tucked into the frame of the single window. Clara noticed it immediately. She didn't ask about it. Elias made a bed on the floor from pelts and a wool blanket, and told her the bunk was hers. He fed the stove, boiled coffee, and set out dried venison and hardtack. She ate without being asked and without thanking him. When they were done, he said, I'll tell you 2 things about me. First, I don't lie. Second, I don't ask questions you haven't offered to answer. She looked at him across the table. Then I'll tell you 2 things about me. First, I'm not what Hector Boone said I was. Second, I came west for a reason, and that reason didn't get off the stage with me. The stove popped. Wind pressed against the cabin walls. What reason? He asked, and then immediately. You don't have to answer. She wrapped both hands around her tin cup. My brother, she said quietly. His name is Thomas. He came west 3 years ago. Rode home for 2 years, then stopped. The last letter came from Caldwell. Elias went very still. Thomas Voss, he said. She looked at him hard. You knew him. He stood, walked to the window, and stood there with his back to her for a long moment, staring at the dark shape of the mountains against the darkening sky. I knew him, he said. And I know what happened to him. The fire crackled. Outside, something moved in the trees, probably just wind. Probably. He didn't tell her everything that night. He told her enough. He told her Thomas Voss had come to Caldwell 3 years ago with a claim to 60 acres of bottomland along Vermejo Creek. Land that sat directly between 2 cattle operations and watered both of their herds. He told her Thomas had filed the claim properly, paid the fees, built a small house on the eastern end of the property, and had started growing hay. He told her Thomas had been found dead in the creek 9 months ago, ruled an accidental drowning by Sheriff Dale Pruitt, and buried in the Caldwell Cemetery before any of his family could be notified. He told her he didn't believe it was an accident. What he didn't tell her was why he believed that. Not yet. Some information, he'd learned the hard way, was more dangerous to carry than a loaded weapon, and he wasn't ready to put that weight on someone he'd known for 4 hours. Clara sat through all of it without moving. Her face was a mask, but her knuckles had gone white around the tin cup. When he finished, she set the cup down deliberately, like she was being careful not to throw it. Who? She asked. One word, flat as a blade. I suspect, he said carefully, but I don't have proof. Not the kind that matters to anyone except the man who did it. Tell me who you suspect. Not yet. She looked at him with eyes that could have stripped bark. I have a right, you do, he said. And I'll tell you. But if I tell you now, you'll ride back to Caldwell tonight and do something that gets you killed before morning. And then Thomas doesn't get justice and you're in the ground beside him. She opened her mouth. Closed it. You know I'm right, he said. She looked away. Toward the photograph in the window frame, though she couldn't see it now in the dark. Whose photograph is that? She asked. The question surprised him. He was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. My wife, he said. Eleanor. Died 4 years ago. Fever. I'm sorry. People say that. I mean it. He looked at her. In the firelight, she looked older than 26 and younger at the same time, tired in a way that comes from grief, not exhaustion. He recognized that kind of tired. I know you do, he said. It came out softer than he intended. He slept on the floor. She didn't sleep at all, or if she did, he didn't hear it. The next morning broke gray and cold, clouds stacking up over the northern peaks in a way that meant rain by afternoon. He was up before dawn, had coffee ready, and when she came out of the bunk she was already dressed and her hair was pinned back with a precision that told him she'd been awake for hours. I want to see where he's buried, she said. Not today, Elias. Not today, he repeated. Today we need to talk about who knows you're up here. She frowned. The whole town watched me leave with you. Right. He poured her coffee. Which means by now, whoever's watching for people who ask the wrong questions knows exactly where you are. Question is whether they see you as a threat or not. Why would they see a rejected mail-order bride as a threat? Because you're Thomas Voss's sister, he said. And you came west from Cincinnati on a mail-order arrangement arranged specifically to land you in Caldwell. He paused. Or did you? She looked at him over her cup. It wasn't entirely random, she admitted slowly. Tell me. The last letter Thomas sent, before they stopped, he mentioned a man. Said this man had made an offer on the creek land, a very low offer, and Thomas had refused. Said the man didn't take refusals well. Said he was worried but didn't want to alarm us. She set her cup down. He mentioned Hector Boone. Elias had gone very still again, that mountain animal stillness she was already starting to recognize as meaning he was working through something serious. Boone owns the cattle operation north of the creek, he said slowly. And the man whose operation sits south of it is the sheriff, Clara said quietly. Dale Pruitt. Thomas mentioned him too. In the silence that followed, rain began on the roof. Soft at first, then harder, drumming down on the stone and timber in long sheets. Somewhere far below, Caldwell sat in the valley, going about its Tuesday morning business, stores opening, horses being shod, the smell of fried bread and coal smoke lifting into the wet air. And somewhere in that town, men who had killed once were now wondering what the woman who'd arrived on their doorstep wanted, and how much she knew, and what they would need to do about it. We have one advantage, Elias said. What's that? They think you're a frightened woman who got sold at auction and bought by an oddity. They don't know what you know. And they don't know what I know. He stood. We keep it that way. We move carefully. We move smart. Clara looked at him steadily. And if they come up here before we're ready? His hand moved to the rifle leaning against the wall. Not dramatically. Just a habit. A fact. Then, he said, we stop being careful. She opened the bag herself, on the second afternoon. He hadn't asked? He'd watched her carry it carefully since the platform, always setting it down gently, always within arm's reach, never leaving it unattended. He was experienced enough with people living at the edge of survival to know that a bag treated that carefully wasn't carrying dresses. She set it on the table and unfolded the top and turned it so he could see inside. Letters. A ledger book with a cracked leather cover. A sealed document with a court stamp from Cincinnati. And a small tintype photograph, a young man with clear eyes and Thomas Voss's same strong jaw, standing in front of a hay press in the bright light of a summer morning. He sent the ledger in his last letter, she said. Separate package, no explanation. Just a note that said keep this safe. Keep it somewhere they'd never look. She touched the cover. I think he knew what was coming. Elias sat across from her and opened the ledger carefully. It was Thomas's work. Methodical, careful, numbers, dates, observations. A record stretching back 2.5 years. Land survey notes. Water flow measurements on Vermejo Creek. Cattle counts on neighboring land, Boone's operation to the north, a smaller spread to the south that, according to county records, was technically owned by a man named Cal Rutter but operated at the direction of the county sheriff. Payment records. Threat records. 3 specific entries where Thomas had written, word for word, conversations in which men had come to his property and told him what would happen if he didn't sell. 1 entry, dated 11 months ago, 4 weeks before Thomas's body was found in the creek. Pruitt came himself today. Told me there were ways men disappeared in this country that nobody ever looked into. I told him I'd written home and that if anything happened to me, my sister would come looking. He laughed. Said Cincinnati women didn't survive Kansas winters. I said he'd be surprised what Cincinnati women could do. Elias read that twice. He knew, he said quietly. He knew. Her voice was steady but her hands weren't. He was counting on me. He didn't tell me directly because he didn't want them reading it if they intercepted the mail. But he knew I'd come. He knew I'd find a way. The mail order arrangement. I wrote to every ranch and broker operation I could find advertising in the Cincinnati Courier. I accepted the first offer from Caldwell. She paused. Hector Boone. Which tells me Boone and Pruitt weren't expecting me. They just saw a woman getting off a stage. Until Boone looked at your eyes and decided you were trouble. Elias said. He wasn't wrong. She said. Something almost like a smile crossed Elias's face. It didn't stay long. He turned to the sealed document. May I? She nodded. Inside was a legal deed of transfer and a notarized statement from a Cincinnati attorney, Thomas, before he'd come west. Had placed the land claim in a legal trust with Clara as sole beneficiary and heir. If anything happened to him, the land was legally, unambiguously hers. It was also, Elias understood, the document that made her dangerous. Because if Clara Voss was alive and in possession of this document and the ledger, and if she could get it before a judge in a city not controlled by Dale Pruitt, then everything Boone and Pruitt had done, the land grab, the murder, all of it, unraveled. The question was how she got it there. There's a circuit judge, Elias said slowly. Judge Aaron Marsh. He comes through Caldwell every 6 weeks. Based in Dodge City. Clean reputation, far as I know. When does he come next? Elias rubbed the back of his neck. 3 days from now. Friday. She looked at him. Can you get a message to him before he arrives? Before Pruitt has a chance to intercept? Maybe. If I ride hard tonight, and catch his circuit at Jericho Crossing before he turns south. That leaves me here alone. He thought about that. He thought about whether that was a problem. He thought about Clara on the platform, chin up, not crying, the stillness in her that came from a decision already made. Are you afraid to be alone here? He asked. No, she said. Do you know how to use a rifle? My father was a Pennsylvania sharpshooter. He taught all 6 of his children. Elias stood and took the Winchester off the wall and checked the load and set it on the table in front of her. Then he went to the shelf and added a box of cartridges and set that beside it. Then he went to the floor near the stove and pulled up a loose stone, and from the space beneath it he removed a short-barreled Colt revolver, already loaded. He set that on the table too. Anyone comes up that trail who isn't me, he said. You don't warn them twice. She put her hand on the revolver. Her hand was steady now. How will I know it's you? She asked. He thought. I'll whistle, he said. 3 notes. Low, high, low. Like a nighthawk. She looked at the photograph of Eleanor in the window frame. She was lucky, Clara said quietly. To have someone like you. He picked up his coat and his own rifle. Go to sleep early, he said. Day after tomorrow is going to be long. He moved to the door and stopped. And Clara, yes? Whatever happens. What you're doing for your brother. It matters. He stepped out into the last of the day's rain, and the door closed, and she sat alone at the table with the ledger and the documents and the 2 guns. And she listened to the sound of the Appaloosa moving down the trail until there was nothing left to hear but the mountain. She slept 3 hours. Not because she wasn't exhausted, she was, bone deep and spirit deep in the way of someone who has been afraid for a long time without allowing herself to show it. She slept 3 hours because something woke her. Not a sound exactly. More like the absence of sound. The way the wind had been steady against the cabin walls and then, suddenly, wasn't. She was out of the bunk with the Colt in her hand before she was fully awake, and she stood in the dark listening. Nothing. Then, very faintly, horses. More than one. Moving slowly. Moving the way people moved when they were trying not to be heard. She went to the south-facing window without lighting a lamp and looked down the trail. Moonlight through a break in the cloud cover. 2 riders. 100 yards out, moving at a walk, their hats pulled low. She went through the options in 3 seconds flat. The way her father had taught her to do, not panic, not freeze, just think. Option 1. They were travelers who didn't know the cabin was occupied. Possible but unlikely at this hour on a trail that went nowhere except here. Option 2. They were Pruitt's men, sent to deal with the inconvenient woman the mountain man had bought. More likely. Much more. Option 3. They were Boone's men, operating separately from Pruitt, which would mean the 2 men weren't as coordinated as she'd assumed, and she might be able to use that gap. She decided it didn't matter which. The result was the same. She moved to the door and cracked it an inch and looked out. The riders had stopped at the edge of the treeline, 100 feet from the porch. She could see the shape of a rifle across one man's saddle. She put 3 cartridges in her left hand and held the Colt with her right, and she opened the door and stepped onto the porch and spoke into the dark before they could speak first. "I can see you," she said. Her voice was calm and clear. "Both of you. I've got a Colt pointed at the bigger one." Silence. The horses shifted. "Lady, we're just—" The smaller one started. "Don't," she said. "Don't lie to me tonight. Tell me who sent you and what for, and I'll decide what to do from there." More silence. "Boone," the bigger one said finally. She'd surprised it out of him, she thought. He hadn't expected her to be in control. "Mr. Boone sent us. He wants the bag. He knows about the bag," she said, half to herself. Which meant Hector Boone knew more than he'd let on when he turned her away at the stage. "He'll pay for it," the smaller man tried. "No trouble. He just wants what was in the bag." "What was in the bag," she said, "is evidence that Hector Boone and Dale Pruitt murdered my brother. And that evidence is no longer in the bag or in this cabin. A lie, delivered flat and certain. It left this mountain this afternoon." Another silence. Longer this time. "Then why are you still here?" the bigger man asked. And his tone had changed, from errand runner to something harder. "Because I wanted to meet the men who work for people like Boone," she said. "I wanted to see their faces." "You can't see our faces," the smaller man said. "I can see enough." She raised her voice slightly. "You've got families, I'd wager. You've got people who'd mourn you. Go home to them. Whatever Boone is paying you, it's not worth a murder charge. Because that's what's coming for anyone connected to this. Murder charges, federal ones, before the week is out." The bigger man's hand moved toward his rifle. "Don't," she said again. He stopped. They sat on their horses for what felt like a very long time. The cloud cover shifted and the moonlight strengthened, and she could see them more clearly now. Ordinary men. Ranch hands? Not killers by nature, she thought. By circumstance, maybe. By poverty. By the bad luck of working for bad men. "Ride back down," she said. Not harsh. Almost gentle. "Tell Boone whatever you want. Tell him the cabin was empty. Tell him you couldn't find it. I don't care. Just ride." They rode. She stood on the porch until the sound of hooves had faded completely. Then she went back inside and reloaded the Colt with hands that were trembling now, not from fear, she told herself. From the cold. She did not sleep again. She moved the ledger and the documents to a space behind the granite wall where a stone had been mortared loosely. She'd found it that afternoon, while Elias was preparing to leave. Running her hands along the walls with the methodical instinct of someone who has learned to find hiding places in every room she occupies. Then she'd put more wood in the stove and sat with the Winchester across her knees and watched the dark outside the window. By dawn she had a plan. Not just to survive. Not just to get the documents to Judge Marsh. A plan that was bigger than that. One that would either work completely or destroy her. When the sun came up she began writing. She wrote for 2 hours without stopping. Her handwriting was small and precise, filling page after page torn carefully from the back of her own diary. When she was done she folded the pages and addressed them, and sat back, and looked at the photograph of Eleanor in the window frame. "He's a good man," she said quietly to the photograph. "I think you knew that." She added wood to the fire, and waited for the sound she knew was coming. Low. High. Low. Like a nighthawk. He came back before noon, riding hard, the Appaloosa's sides dark with sweat. She had coffee and the whole story waiting. He sat at the table and listened to the account of the 2 riders without interrupting, and when she finished he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Boone knows about the ledger." "Yes." "Which means Thomas told someone, or someone saw the package being sent. Or," she said, "Boone has people working the postal route." He nodded slowly. He'd thought of that. "Did they see your face clearly?" "Moonlight. Partial. But yes, probably." "Then Boone knows you're not frightened." Which changes his calculation. He stood and poured coffee and brought both cups to the table. "Pruitt will hear about this by tonight. If he doesn't know already." "Let him," she said. He looked at her carefully. She slid the folded pages across the table. "Read those." He read. It took a long time. She watched his face while he did. She had learned in 48 hours that his face showed very little, but what it showed was real, so she watched for the small things. The slight tightening around the eyes when he reached the section about Pruitt. The single hard breath through the nose when he got to the part involving the judge. "This is dangerous," he said when he finished. "Everything about this is dangerous. This specifically. If this goes wrong, everything is already wrong," she said quietly. "Thomas is in the ground. Boone is still grazing cattle on land that belongs to me. Pruitt is still wearing a badge he bought with murder. Nothing goes right without risk." He set the pages down. He looked at the photograph of Eleanor. Clara had come to understand that when he looked at that photograph he wasn't only grieving, he was asking something. A kind of consultation. "She would have liked you," he said. "Eleanor. She had the same quality." "What quality?" "Certainty," he said. "Not arrogance. Not recklessness. Just certainty about what matters." "And do you think it can work?" Clara asked. He picked up the pages again and read the final section one more time. Outside, the mountain was bright and clean after the rain, the kind of day that felt like a promise. Far down the valley, barely visible, Caldwell sat in its dust. "Judge Marsh agreed to the meeting," Elias said. "I caught him at Jericho Crossing, like I planned. He'll arrive Friday morning as scheduled. If we can get the documents to him privately, before he rides into Caldwell and Pruitt has a chance to get to him, yes. The legal case is solid. The deed is notarized, the ledger is dated and witnessed, and Marsh has a reputation for not tolerating corruption in his circuits." "But," she said, "but Boone and Pruitt aren't going to wait for Friday." "No," she agreed. "They're going to move tomorrow. Thursday. Because on Friday it's too late. Which is why Thursday," he said slowly. "We need to be somewhere they don't expect. Not here on the mountain." "Not here on the mountain," he confirmed. She had already thought of this too. The Morrison widow, she said. He looked at her, surprised. I noticed her house when we rode through town. A widow alone, on the eastern edge of Caldwell, with a vegetable garden and white curtains and a porch that faces directly toward the road the circuit judge rides in on. She paused. I also noticed she watched us ride through with an expression that wasn't friendly toward the men watching us leave town. Elias said. Margaret Morrison. Her husband died 3 years ago in a property dispute. Lost the case in Pruitt's court. Then she might help us. He was quiet for a moment. She might get hurt. She already got hurt, Clara said firmly. When they took her husband's land. We all already got hurt. The question is whether we do anything about it, or we just keep surviving in smaller and smaller circles. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he stood and began packing. We ride down tonight, he said. After dark. Leave the horses at Wickham's livery, man named Silas Wickham, he's got no love for Pruitt either. Then we go to Margaret Morrison's house on foot. And the documents? You carry them. On your person. Not in the bag. She tucked the papers inside the bodice of her dress without ceremony or self-consciousness. And he did not look away out of politeness but watched with the practical assessment of a man checking that a weapon was properly secured. When she was done, she pulled her coat closed over it. She picked up the Winchester. I'm keeping this, she said. It wasn't a question. I'd be a fool to argue, he said. They left the cabin an hour after dark. He locked the door, a reflex, she realized, a habit of a man who had come back to things before. He stood on the porch for a moment and looked at the valley lights below, the scattered constellation of Caldwell in the blackness. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said without turning around, you did right by your brother. No matter what, you came and you fought and you didn't flinch. He knew you would. Clara looked at the lights below. I know he did, she said. They went down the mountain into the dark and the whole town of Caldwell slept below them, unknowing, while Thursday gathered itself at the edge of the world and prepared to arrive like a verdict. Margaret Morrison opened her door at midnight without surprise. She was 60, built like a fence post, with silver hair and the eyes of a woman who had outlasted considerable grief on sheer unwillingness to be defeated. She looked at Clara and she looked at Elias and she said, I've been wondering when someone was going to come. Then she stepped aside and let them in. She'd made the bed in her spare room and she'd left a pot of bean soup on the back of the stove, and she asked no questions that night. In the morning she made biscuits and set them on the table and poured coffee, and only then, with the gray dawn spreading through the white curtains, did she say, Tell me. They told her everything. She listened. When they were done she said, Thomas Voss was a good man. He used to bring me firewood in the winter, after Jacob died. Wouldn't take payment. She refilled everyone's coffee cup. What do you need from me? The judge arrives by the northern road at 9, Clara said. If we can get the documents to him before he passes the sheriff's office, I'll go, Margaret said. It could be dangerous. I'm 61 years old, Margaret said, with a flatness that closed the argument. I have had a dangerous life, and a short man in a badge doesn't frighten me. So it was settled. They had one more problem. Word had come in around 6 in the morning. Silas at the livery, who turned out to be not just a friend to Elias but a whole small network of men quietly and bitterly opposed to Pruitt's authority, had sent his boy around with a note. Boone had arrived at the sheriff's office the previous evening. They were together now. 2 deputies had been posted at both ends of Main Street. A rider had been sent north, toward the Circuit Road. Toward Judge Marsh. They're going to intercept the judge, Elias said. To warn him off? Clara asked. To bend him. Boone's got money and Pruitt's got fear. Between the two they've managed most problems in this county for 3 years. He looked at the note. But they don't know I already met Marsh at Jericho Crossing. They don't know he's already read a written summary of the case. They think they can still manage this. Then we have a window, Clara said. Small one. Very small. She looked at Margaret. How far is it to the northern road by the back way? Through the creek bed? Margaret said. 15 minutes on foot if you're not slow. I'm not slow. I'm coming with you, Elias said. She looked at him. If Pruitt sees you with me, he'll know it's planned. He might do something drastic. And if Boone's rider gets to the judge before we do, then Margaret meets the judge on the road alone, as a citizen. With a sealed document and a story that she, a widow with no connection to any of this, is trying to bring to his attention. She paused. They won't touch a 60-year-old widow on a public road before a judge. You hope, Elias said. I know, she said. Because if they do, they've just committed their crime in front of the circuit judge. Either way, we win. He looked at her for a long moment. The morning light was filling the room now, catching the dust motes in the air, making everything look briefly golden and fragile. You planned all of this, he said, when you were sitting alone up on that mountain. I planned most of it in Cincinnati, she said. And you made the rest possible. Margaret was already putting on her good coat, a dark wool with brass buttons that she wore, Clara suspected, to church and to funerals and to any occasion that called for the presentation of dignity in the face of difficult circumstances. She took the documents, the sealed deed, the legal papers, a written summary in Clara's precise hand, and a separate letter Clara had written addressed directly to the judge, and tucked them into her coat pocket. I'll be back within the hour, she said, and walked out the door with the unhurried authority of a woman who knew exactly who she was. What happened in the next 40 minutes became the part of the story that Caldwell told for the next 50 years. Margaret met Judge Aaron Marsh on the northern road a quarter-mile from the first buildings of town, walking toward him without hesitation, raising one hand in a calm greeting. She introduced herself by name, identified herself as the widow of a man who had lost property in Dale Pruitt's court, and presented the sealed packet before Pruitt's rider, who arrived from the east 2 minutes later, could do anything except sit on his horse and watch it happen. Judge Marsh read on horseback, right there on the road, with the morning sun on the pages and the rider watching and Margaret Morrison standing on the roadside with her hands folded, waiting. And inside the Morrison house, Clara and Elias were not idle. Because while Margaret was on the northern road, Dale Pruitt and Hector Boone were coming to the Morrison house. They'd been watching it. Silas sent the second note at 7:30. Clara had expected this, not hoped for it, but expected it, and had prepared for it the same way she'd prepared for everything. Carefully. Without illusion. Pruitt knocked on the front door of Margaret's house with the casual authority of a man who has never been told no in his own jurisdiction. He had one deputy behind him. He did not know about Elias. He expected to find one woman, alone, frightened. Clara opened the door. "Morning, Sheriff," she said. He recovered fast. "Miss Voss. I'd like you to come with me." "On what charge?" He smiled. It was an unpleasant smile. "Theft," he said. "Property belonging to the estate of Thomas Voss, deceased, belonging to his creditors pending resolution of outstanding debts." "My brother had no debts," she said. "County records say otherwise." "Forged county records," she said clearly. Not loudly. Just clearly. "On what date, specifically?" He blinked. Just slightly. Behind him, she saw Hector Boone standing in the street. Watching. Not approaching. Letting Pruitt do the work. She looked at Pruitt. "I'm not going anywhere with you. But I will tell you that Judge Aaron Marsh is reading a full account of your activities right now, on the northern road." Delivered by Margaret Morrison. She watched his face go through several colors. "And I'll tell you something else." She reached into her coat and produced a single folded page, not the documents, which were with Marsh, but a letter she'd written the previous night. Addressed to the U.S. Marshal's office in Dodge City, containing a complete summary of everything in the ledger, signed, witnessed by Silas Wickham, and already sent before dawn by the livery boy riding the mail route. "That went out this morning," she said. "So whatever you're about to do, shoot me, arrest me, make me disappear the way my brother disappeared, it doesn't change anything. The only thing left to decide is whether you run or whether you stand here and face it." Pruitt's hand moved to his sidearm, and Elias Cord stepped out from the hallway behind Clara. He didn't draw. He just stood there. 6'3", 190 pounds, stone-faced, with his rifle loose in his right hand. The deputy behind Pruitt looked at him, and then looked at his own feet and found them very interesting. "Elias," Pruitt said. Something had gone out of his voice. "Dale," Elias said. The whole street had gone quiet. People on the boardwalks, people in doorways. Everyone who had spent 3 years looking the other way had turned to look. Because something in the air had shifted, the way it shifts when a storm breaks and the pressure releases and you can breathe again. Pruitt looked at Elias. He looked at Clara. He looked at the letter in her hand. He looked at the watching faces of Caldwell. And he understood. He turned to look at Boone. Boone was already walking away, moving toward his horse, not running. Boone was too careful to run, but moving with the deliberate pace of a man recalculating. "Hector!" Pruitt called. Boone didn't stop. Pruitt stood alone on the street in front of Margaret Morrison's house, and every face in Caldwell was turned toward him, and the sound of horses coming from the northern road, Judge Marsh arriving. With Margaret walking beside his horse, still composed, still unhurried, filled the morning air. The deputy behind Pruitt took his hat off, looked at it, and walked away. Pruitt unbuckled his gun belt. He set it on the ground. He put his hands up. Not because he was a man with any nobility or regret. He did it because he had spent 3 years making careful calculations, and his calculation now said there was no angle left to play. It was over. It took until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, all the paperwork and statements, and the formal meeting in Margaret Morrison's front parlor with Judge Marsh at the table, for everything to be formally set in motion. The warrant for Pruitt's arrest signed on the spot. The dispatch to the marshal's office, confirming the letter already sent. The legal validation of Clara's deed to the 60 acres of bottomland along Vermejo Creek. The deed bearing Thomas Voss's signature, and the Cincinnati notary seal, and now the circuit judge's stamp of recognition. Hector Boone was found 2 miles outside of town, riding south, and brought back by 3 citizens who had decided, now that the balance had shifted, which side of history they wanted to be on. Clara stood on the porch of Margaret Morrison's house at 3 in the afternoon, and looked at the street. It was ordinary in the way that things return to ordinary after a storm, everything slightly altered, slightly clean, the wrongness rinsed out, and something fragile growing in its place. Elias stood beside her. "What will you do?" he asked. "With the land. Build," she said. "Hey, same as Thomas started. Maybe more eventually." She was quiet for a moment. "It's good land." He knew that. He did. "Will you?" She started and stopped. "I'll stay in the valley a while," he said. It was careful language and she understood why he used it. Some wounds don't close all the way and some silences mean more than filling them. "Good," she said. Simple as that. Later that evening, when the excitement had settled and the deputy U.S. Marshal had arrived from the relay station 20 miles south, and Pruitt was sitting in his own jail for the particular irony of that. And Boone was under house arrest at his own ranch waiting for the federal proceedings to begin. Margaret Morrison set out a supper that could have fed 12 people and served it to 3. She lit the good lamp and they sat around the table, an old widow, a mountain man, and a woman who had come west to find her dead brother, and found something harder and more necessary than grief, and they ate. Elias looked at the lamp flame for a moment, and Clara thought he might be thinking of Eleanor, and she said nothing, because nothing was the right thing to say. Thomas Voss's grave sat in the Caldwell cemetery under a cottonwood that had grown up unplanned and enormous, throwing shade across 6 plots in the summer heat. Clara went there the morning after it was over. Alone. She stood at the headstone, plain limestone, the name and dates barely carved, the kind of marker a county gives when nobody's come to claim the body, and she didn't cry. She'd cried in Cincinnati, alone in the dark of her room, reading and rereading his last letter. She had used up her tears somewhere over the weeks of planning, over the long train ride and the stage and the humiliation of the auction platform. What she had left was something quieter. "I came," she told him. "I know you knew I would." The cottonwood moved in the morning wind. The shadows shifted. She stayed for a long time, and when she left she took the limestone marker with her. She'd commissioned a proper stone from the cutter in town, granite, his name in deep clear letters, and below it, he kept honest records. The truth caught up. A year later, the 60 acres along Vermejo Creek were green and productive. The hay she grew fed herds across 3 counties. She hired 2 hands, one of them the bigger of the 2 riders who'd come up the mountain that night, a man named Cal who turned out to be, as she'd suspected, not a killer by nature but a poor man who'd made the wrong choices and was quietly grateful for the chance to make better ones. Pruitt went to the federal penitentiary in Leavenworth. Boone lost his operation in the legal proceedings that followed and died 3 years later in Wichita, broke, unmourned, in a boarding house room with a view of an alley. Margaret Morrison got her husband's land back. Elias stayed in the valley that first winter, and the one after, and eventually stopped counting winters as separate from the life he was building. He never moved back to the stone cabin on the mountain, though he kept it. Sometimes in summer he'd ride up there alone and sit on the porch and look at the valley below, at the green line of Vermejo Creek and the hay fields. And at the house that had gone up where Thomas Voss's first small structure had stood, larger now, with white curtains in the windows. He kept Eleanor's photograph. He put it on the windowsill of the valley house, where the morning light found it first. Clara never asked him to take it down. There's a thing that happens in hard country, and it's not romantic, and it's not simple, and it doesn't have a clean name. It's just 2 people who have both been broken by the world sitting down at the same table, day after day, and deciding together that the world isn't finished with them yet. That's not an ending. That's the beginning of a different story. What people in Caldwell remembered, in the years that came after, what they told their children and their children's children, wasn't the arrest, or the trial, or the legal proceedings. What they remembered was the woman on the platform at the Silver Spur auction, chin up, not crying, while the auctioneer's voice cut through the dust. And what she did 3 days later. Not with a gun. Not with rage. With a ledger, a legal document, a 61-year-old widow in a good coat, and the absolute unbreakable certainty that her brother's life had mattered, and that the truth, given enough time and enough courage, always catches up. The West was full of men who ruled by fear. What it never counted on was a woman who had already faced her worst and decided she wasn't done.